Hey everyone, it's Alistair. Now, I already know what you're thinking, it's been so long since the last upload. I got a little absorbed by Genshin Impact, and things got delayed, but it's fine. A week or two behind upload schedule isn't the worst, right? Wait, it's been how long? Gacha games, the prevailing cause of empty bank accounts and late alimony payments. While I'm not sure calling gacha games a genre is quite apt, the term is generally used to describe games with the same notorious monetization model. This mechanic will usually go by some name like wishing or summoning, but typically it involves spending one of the game's premium currencies for some kind of prize, often a character, weapon, or other significant gameplay feature. And while you can accumulate premium currency over weeks or months of gameplay, you're rarely guaranteed to get exactly what you want. And if you run out and still find yourself without whatever it is you were looking for, the only alternative is to fork over some of your hard-earned cash. Odds are you're probably listening to this explanation and thinking about games you've played yourself, or maybe you're drawing other similarities. Gacha games earned their name from Japanese capsule toy machines after all, and most Western people could easily draw parallels with trading cards like Pokémon or Yu-Gi-Oh! They operate on the same basis. Even though you're effectively buying 10 or so cards in a pack, you're really buying into the chance at pulling that super rare card. The difference most people point out is that you're still getting a physical product with these, and while you'd pay a premium for any specific card, you can still acquire them through online or in-person trading. Loot boxes are the other monetization model people will often draw similarities to. Overwatch used to be the staple example of these, where players could earn or purchase loot boxes with cosmetic prizes inside. The important difference here is that whereas typical gacha games offer prizes that directly affect gameplay, the Overwatch model of loot boxes has no impact on the game. Counter-Strike Global Offensive is another interesting example. Though unlike the Overwatch model, players can actually trade the items they receive with other players through the Steam marketplace. This means that even though these items are cosmetic and offer no gameplay advantage, they're still attributed a monetary value by the player base, for better or for worse. So what games do I consider to follow the gacha monetization model? Well, it's tricky to pin them down. The typical examples tend to be mobile games that offer characters or equipment through a gacha mechanic. Examples include Fire Emblem Heroes, Alice, Pokémon Masters, Fate Grand Order, and so on. These sorts of games are where most people familiar with the term gacha probably either started with or at least familiar with. Genshin Impact is another one that follows a similar trend as the previously mentioned games, though breaks conventions in that it's not exclusively a mobile game. Genshin is playable on mobile, PC, and console, so you could argue that it should be considered separate from the other games. You could even argue something like FIFA's Ultimate Team qualifies as a gacha game. It discards the star rating system that's so typical in mobile gacha games, but you're still opening packs in the hopes of pulling different players with high ratings. In fact, a few years ago, EA was forced to be more transparent about the probabilities of what FIFA players can expect to find in each pack, and introduced a feature in-game that allows you to display the probabilities of different players within packs. This tells me nothing. I always found it funny how the best prizes are often given a stated probability of less than 1%. It could be the difference between 0.1% or 0.001%. The described ranges play in EA's favour here as well, since the difference between an 88 plus rated player and a 90 plus rated player, or a specific 88 rated player, could be vastly different as well. And that's all before you consider they sell the game to you again the following year, forcing you to invest the time and money all over again. The overwhelming majority of FIFA players won't be able to experience using one of the highest rated cards on their team, let alone a team full of them, because by the time the next game comes out, the investment of both their time and money has been rendered useless. Even the cosmetic-only games can be frowned upon here as well. Apex Legends and Overwatch are both notorious for seasonal events, which include limited time skins and cosmetics for players to obtain. Sometimes these can be obtained as a reward for regular play, but more often than not you'll have to cough up the cash if you want any specific rewards. Apex Legends collection events were criticised for this, and rightly so. To unlock the heirloom prize for a relevant character during one of these events, you're going to have to spend over £100, or nearly $150. And if you want one of the specific lesser rewards in the event, like a character or weapon skin, you either have to pay a premium or hope that you get it through random loot boxes. Even though, once again, these are cosmetic items only, the system is still set up to encourage extreme levels of spending through gacha-like monetization. What about the digital card games like Hearthstone, Gwent, and Legends of Runeterra? The natural assumption is that these are like physical trading card games. But the problem is that none of these games allow you to trade cards you receive with other players. Decks will often be expensive to create as well, and dusting cards as you would in Hearthstone will give you a fraction of the resources used, often leaving you short of a different deck if you decide to mix it up. I consider these kinder than the typical gacha game, but definitely worse than the cosmetic only games, given how the cards you have at your disposal directly impact the playstyles you have access to. The only exception here I would say is Legends of Runeterra, which I'd say has the best model of the digital card games I've personally played. The game incentivizes building your collection rather than creating one deck and deconstructing it for another deck down the line, which naturally allows for much more variety from the player perspective. Anyway, at this point I've talked at length about all of these different monetization models, but there are two things that remain abundantly clear. One thing I've yet to mention is that many of these games are free to play, and that playing many of these games without spending a penny can still offer countless hours of entertainment. Genshin Impact is frequently compared to Breath of the Wild, and rightly so, given the amount of overworld there is to explore and get lost in. Then when you add on the periodic festivals, events, and new content, it's easy to see that some can find great value in these games. For all the new content, good or bad, that comes to these games, there are developers in the background who are paid to create it. The nature of these games is to constantly deliver new content, and that means there will always be costs in maintaining that service. I can't deny for a second that some of these monetization models are beneficial to maintaining the longevity of these games. The other fact is that while these games are no doubt designed to demand a player's time and money, they still do incredibly well. So the question is, considering how aggressive and arguably unfriendly these monetization models are to the consumer, why are they still so successful? Well, to start to unravel that question, it might help to take a look at something called the compulsion loop. This is a theoretical chain that underpins a lot of different activities in video games. It consists of three main parts: anticipation, challenge, and reward. I've been playing a lot of Monster Hunter Rise recently, so I'll use that as an example, since the progression of that and pretty much every other Monster Hunter game in the series follows this pattern. In this case, you start off with the challenge, usually killing your first large monster. This can actually be somewhat difficult depending on your experience with the game, but once you finally overcome the challenge, you're given your reward, often currency and more importantly, monster parts. These monster parts allow you to create stronger equipment, which then allows you to overcome more challenging monsters. This is what keeps the gameplay engaging, but one thing that's interesting to note is where the compulsion loop would attribute the most entertainment. You would think the reward would be what gives you that sweet dopamine, but it's actually the anticipation. The activity of getting stronger, developing your character, that's what the compulsion loop would argue offers the most entertainment. It makes sense when you think about it, and also explains why the aesthetic side of the game is so fleshed out. Creating new armor, finding synergistic skills, creating outfits, and so on. The compulsion loop doesn't try to suggest that anticipation is the only driving force in what makes a game entertaining, because all of the steps are vital. Without a meaningful reward, there's nothing for a player to anticipate using that reward on. And likewise, a challenge is necessary to justify the excitement for new gear and equipment. But anticipation is arguably at the center of this loop, the key step that developers tap into to promote player engagement, whether it's for a typical gameplay loop like in Monster Hunter, or in a game with more aggressive monetization, where spending real money can accelerate the time spent reaching the anticipation phase. The compulsion loop becomes much more illuminating when you consider the pressure that is placed on the anticipation phase. The most common of these is through withdrawal. Limiting a player's reward, often access to resources or premium currency, puts more pressure on the anticipation. The allure doesn't necessarily come from a greater challenge being presented by the game, it's from the acquisition, be it new characters, weapons, cards, gameplay styles, whatever it may be. This is why you often see outrage or despair from players who spend months saving up premium currency in a gacha game only to fail to secure whatever it is they were saving for. They withstood all of that pressure placed on them to spend their reward, but ultimately missed out on the satisfaction that comes from finally obtaining that new prize. Envy is another trick used to pressure consumers into dropping some cash. If you've ever played a digital card game, you're probably aware of this feeling. Playing against an opponent, whether they have a unique or interesting deck with a fun gameplay mechanic, or a powerful deck that can be used to consistently win games, will often inspire you to try it out yourself. And often enough, the only way to obtain the resources necessary to obtain that deck will be through spending money. It's only natural to desire something if you see another player have success with it. The last, and arguably most sinister trick I want to discuss, is FOMO, as in fear of missing out. This is often where the horror stories of people spending thousands on gacha find their origin. Almost all of these games will offer limited time events or rewards for players to interact with. It's arguably subjective what could fall into this notion. Apex Legends collection events could qualify, as could the periodic events in a FIFA game. But gacha games by nature tap into this, offering limited opportunities to obtain specific characters or weapons. Once their featured appearance has passed, they may only be available at astronomically unlikely odds, if at all. This is a problematic issue to fix because it's only an issue for some. People with addictive behavior or tendencies to spend impulsively are the most likely to spend due to fear of missing out. But many other players would have no such issue. And removing limited time content is no real solution either. Rare or exclusive content generates buzz and excitement around a game after all. So ultimately, it comes down to us, the consumers, to determine what we deem acceptable and what crosses the line when it comes to gacha. The fact remains that gacha monetization is gambling. However, I think it's still fair to acknowledge that some do it better than others. On the one hand, companies like EA seem willing to disguise information as much as they legally can, if it increases sales. Because even though the odds of pulling a star player in FIFA Ultimate Team might be among the tiniest possible chance, you know that someone will look at less than 1% and think, that could be me. On the flip side, Fire Emblem Heroes introduced a mechanic a while back that they call 4-star special rate, which is a chance similar to that of pulling a 5-star character to receive what's essentially an outdated 5-star character that levels up in the summoning animation. In practicality, this serves as a small chance of getting a free 5-star from earlier in the game's lifespan, without resetting the pity rate that you accumulate in the hopes of a specific 5-star character. This is a really elegant mechanic in my opinion. From the developer's perspective, you introduce players to new heroes, which may lead to them enjoying the playstyle and deciding to invest premium currency on that specific character in future. Yet there's little downside, since the only people really summoning for these outdated heroes in future are players who are die-hard fans of the character. Meanwhile, from the player's point of view, you get a free, albeit random, 5-star character without ruining your chances at getting the character that you originally intended on summoning for. Like them or not, gacha games aren't going away anytime soon. And while I'd like to hope that the next one to rope me in is less blatant in how it tries to shake me down for every penny I own, I can't deny the appeal that gacha mechanics inherently bring. So that's gacha in a nutshell, and hopefully you've got a better understanding of how it works and why it's so successful. And if not, well, it's only $1 for a roll on the exclusive summoning event, with a 0.6% chance of a follow-up video.